The text message from my sister came at 3:42 a.m. Dad passed away an hour ago. Don't bother coming to the funeral. You lost that right when you abandoned him. I stared at my phone in the darkness of my bedroom, the blue light illuminating the tears that had already started to fall. Dad and I had just spoken on Sunday, 3 days ago. He'd been tired, but laughing as we finished our weekly call that had been our ritual for the past 7 years. 7 years that my siblings knew nothing about. I read the message again, my hand trembling. Anger and grief fought for dominance as I sat up in bed. My husband Mark stirred beside me, reaching out when he heard my stifled sob. "Elena? What's wrong?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. "Dad died," I whispered, the words feeling wrong in my mouth. "And Diane says I'm not welcome at the funeral." Mark sat up immediately, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "That's ridiculous. Of course you're going." I wasn't so sure. The history between me and my siblings, Diane, Peter, and Michael, was complicated and painful. They believed I'd abandoned our father after our mother died, moving 3 states away and rarely visiting. What they didn't know was that the distance had been Dad's idea. "Go live your life, Ellie," he'd told me 8 years ago as I sat at his kitchen table, clutching a job offer letter from a prestigious firm in Chicago. "Your mother would want that." "I want that." "But you need someone here," I'd argued. My siblings all lived within an hour of Dad's house, but they had their own families, their own busy lives. I was single then, my career my only real commitment. Dad had taken my hand in his grip still strong despite the arthritis that had begun to twist his fingers. What I need is to know that at least one of my children is living the life they want, not the life they think they owe me. So I'd gone with one condition: weekly Sunday calls never missed. Later, when I met and married Mark, Dad insisted we maintain the tradition, even when we traveled. For 7 years, every Sunday at 5 p.m., I'd call my father, and we'd talked about everything and nothing for an hour or more. My siblings didn't know because Dad had asked me not to tell them. "They'll just feel guilty they don't do the same," he'd said. "Let them visit when they can, without feeling like they're competing with you." So I'd kept our secret. Even when I'd hear from Diane or Peter about how they'd checked in on Dad that week, the subtle dig at my absence clear in their tone. And now Dad was gone, and they thought I didn't deserve to say goodbye. I slipped out of bed and went to the kitchen, making coffee I knew I wouldn't drink. As the machine gurgled and hissed, I scrolled through my phone to the last text Dad had sent me after our Sunday call. "The doctor says the new medication is working. Don't worry so much, Ellie. Love you." He hadn't told me things were bad enough that he might die. He'd protected me right to the end. The funeral would be in 3 days, according to Diane's message. She hadn't bothered to tell me when or where, but I knew it would be at Riverside Chapel where Mom's service had been. Dad had mentioned more than once that he'd already made arrangements there. "You need to call Diane," Mark said, coming into the kitchen in his bathrobe. "Clear this up." I shook my head. "She won't listen. None of them will." I showed him the message again. "They've already decided I'm the villain." "Then we'll go anyway," Mark said firmly. "They can't stop you from attending your own father's funeral." I knew technically he was right, but the thought of causing a scene at Dad's funeral made me feel sick. He wouldn't have wanted that, but he also wouldn't have wanted me excluded. I took a deep breath and dialed my sister's number, knowing she wouldn't answer at this hour but needing to try. To my surprise, she picked up on the 3rd ring. "What do you want, Elena?" Her voice was hoarse, whether from crying or just being awakened, I couldn't tell. "Diane, I'm so sorry about Dad." Save it," she cut me off. "We both know you checked out of this family years ago. Dad needed you and you weren't here. End of story." "That's not true," I said, my voice breaking. "Dad and I talked every week. We were close." There was a pause, then a bitter laugh. "Right. A phone call now, and then when you remembered he existed. Meanwhile, the rest of us were here, taking him to appointments, fixing things around his house, being actual children to him." "Every week," I repeated. "Every Sunday for 7 years, Diane. Without fail." Ask his neighbor Rose if you don't believe me. She used to tease him about how he'd shoo her away at 4:55 because his daughter was about to call. There was silence on the other end. I'm coming to the funeral, I continued. Not to fight with you or the others, but because Dad would want me there, just like he wanted me to take that job in Chicago, even though none of you understood. Dad never said anything about regular calls with you, Diane said finally, her voice less certain. Why would he keep that a secret? I sighed. He didn't want you guys to feel bad. He knew how busy you all were with your families, and he didn't want you to think you weren't doing enough. Another long silence. We'll talk about this when you get here, she said finally, but don't expect a warm welcome from Peter or Michael. After she hung up, I sat at the kitchen table feeling hollow. Even if they let me attend the funeral, they still saw me as the daughter who'd abandoned her father. The truth might soften their judgment, but it wouldn't erase years of resentment. Mark put a cup of coffee in front of me. What did she say? She didn't hang up on me, so that's something, I replied. We're going to Indiana. I need to book flights. The trip from Chicago to Indianapolis was a short flight, but it felt endless. I spent most of it staring out the window, thinking about Dad and the complicated web of love and misunderstanding that had led to this moment. Mark held my hand, silent but supportive, letting me wrestle with my thoughts. We rented a car at the airport and drove the familiar route to my hometown. Dad's house was in Oakwood, a small suburb with tree-lined streets and modest homes that had seen better days. As we pulled into the driveway, I noticed Diane's SUV and Peter's truck already parked on the street. You ready for this? Mark asked, squeezing my hand. No, I admitted, but Dad would tell me to straighten my spine and walk in like I belong here. So that's what I'm going to do. The front door was unlocked, and we walked into the house that still felt like home despite the years away. Voices came from the kitchen, my siblings discussing funeral arrangements. They fell silent when I appeared in the doorway. Michael, my youngest brother, was the first to react, his face hardening. Who invited you? I don't need an invitation to my father's house, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Peter, always the peacemaker, stood up. Let's all just take a breath here. Dad wouldn't want us fighting. Dad also wouldn't want his daughter excluded from his funeral, I pointed out. Diane, who'd been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. I told her she could come. We should at least hear what she has to say. Michael scoffed. What's to hear? She left Dad, left all of us, when Mom died and he needed her most. Then she shows up now, probably hoping for something in the will. The accusation stung, but I forced myself to stay calm. I left because Dad insisted I take that job, and I never lost touch with him. We spoke every single Sunday for 7 years. Convenient claim when he's not here to confirm it, Michael shot back. Actually, a new voice said from the doorway, I can confirm it. We all turned to see Rose Henderson, Dad's next-door neighbor for the past 30 years, standing there with a casserole dish in her hands. I let myself in the back door, she explained, and I couldn't help overhearing. She set the dish on the counter and looked at my brothers and sister. Your father was very proud of Elena. He told me all about her promotion last month and how she was thinking of starting a family soon. She gave me a sad smile. He was looking forward to being a grandfather again. The kitchen fell silent as my siblings processed this information. I hadn't even told Dad about the fertility treatments Mark and I had started. He must have guessed from something I'd said. Why wouldn't he tell us you two were in regular contact? Peter asked, his voice genuinely confused. I sighed. He didn't want you to feel guilty about not calling as often. He knew you were all busy with your families and jobs, and he was proud of that. He didn't want to make it into a competition. That sounds like Dad, Peter admitted reluctantly. Rose nodded. William was always protecting all of you in his own way. She touched my arm gently. He kept your artwork in his bedroom, you know. That painting of the lake house you did in college. I hadn't known that. I'd given him that painting before I left for Chicago, thinking it would remind him of happy family vacations when Mom was still alive. The thought of it hanging in his room all these years brought fresh tears to my eyes. "There's something else you should all know," Rose continued. "Your father asked me to be the executor of his will. He updated it about 6 months ago, and he specifically asked me to make sure all of you were present for the reading after the funeral." She looked pointedly at my siblings. "All of you." Diane had the grace to look embarrassed. "We were upset when we sent that text. People say things they don't mean when they're grieving." "Yeah, well, some of us still mean it," Michael muttered, but Peter silenced him with a look. "We should focus on Dad now," Peter said. "The funeral's tomorrow, and there's still a lot to do." Rose squeezed my hand before leaving. "Come by later if you want to talk," she whispered. "William told me so much about you." The rest of the day passed in a blur of funeral arrangements and awkward silences. My siblings didn't exactly welcome me with open arms, but they didn't try to force me out either. We worked side by side, selecting photos for the memorial display, confirming details with the funeral home, and accepting food from neighbors and friends who came to offer condolences. That evening, while the others were busy in the living room with more visitors, I slipped away to Dad's bedroom. It was exactly as I remembered, meticulously neat, with a worn paperback on a nightstand. And there, above his dresser, hung my painting of the lake house, more prominently displayed than I would have imagined. I sat on the edge of his bed, running my hand over the quilt Mom had made years ago. On the nightstand, next to his reading glasses, was a small notebook. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Inside, in Dad's precise handwriting, were notes from our calls. Not detailed accounts, just brief reminders. Elena's presentation went well. Mark's mother visiting next week. Ellie considering fertility treatment. Don't bring up unless she does. Each entry was dated, every Sunday for years. He'd been keeping track of my life, noting the things that mattered to me, reminding himself of what to ask about in our next call. I clutched the notebook to my chest as tears spilled down my cheeks. "What are you doing in here?" I looked up to see Michael in the doorway, his expression suspicious. "Just saying goodbye," I said, not bothering to hide my tears. I held out the notebook. "Did you know Dad kept notes from all our conversations?" Michael hesitated, then came into the room and took the notebook. He flipped through it, his brow furrowed. "Every week," he said quietly, more to himself than to me. "You really did call every week." "I told you I did," I replied, trying to keep the hurt from my voice. He sat down beside me on the bed, still looking through the notebook. "There are things in here from just a few days ago." I nodded. "We talked on Sunday." He seemed tired, but I had no idea. My voice broke and I couldn't continue. Michael was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry for what I said earlier, about you coming for the will." "It's okay," I said automatically, though it had hurt deeply. "No, it's not," he insisted. "I was wrong. And now I'm wondering what else I've been wrong about." We sat together in silence for a few minutes, the notebook between us filled with evidence of a relationship I'd maintained and they'd never known about. Finally, Michael spoke again. "Why did you really leave? Was it just for the job?" I considered how to answer. Partly, it was a great opportunity, but also because Dad insisted. After Mom died, he was worried all of us were putting our lives on hold for him. You and Peter had your families nearby, and Diane was already established in her career here. I was the only one he thought he could set free in a way. Michael nodded slowly. "That sounds like Dad, always thinking he was being a burden, even when he wasn't." For the first time in years, I felt a genuine connection with my brother. Remember how he used to refuse help with the simplest things? Mom used to get so frustrated with him. Michael actually smiled at that. Yeah, and then he'd pretend he'd fixed whatever it was himself, even though we all knew Mom had done it when he wasn't looking. We shared a laugh, and for a moment, it was like the years of distance between us lessened slightly. The funeral the next day was well attended. Dad had been respected in the community, a high school science teacher for 35 years who'd taught generations of local kids. The chapel at Riverside was filled with former students, colleagues, neighbors, and friends. My siblings and I sat in the front row, presenting a united front despite the tension still simmering beneath the surface. I was grateful they'd put aside their feelings enough to allow me to sit with them, to be recognized as Dad's daughter. After the service, as we stood receiving condolences from the long line of mourners, I was struck by how many people mentioned my name. "You must be Elena," one older woman said, clasping my hand. "William was so proud of you. He showed me pictures of your new house last month." A former colleague of Dad's patted my arm. "Your father told us all about your promotion. He practically burst with pride telling us about it at our monthly poker game." Again and again, I heard similar comments from people who knew all about my life in Chicago, my marriage to Mark, my career accomplishments. Dad had shared my life with his friends, even while keeping our regular contact a secret from my siblings. I saw the confusion on my brothers' and sisters' faces as they overheard these comments. The narrative they'd constructed about me, the absent daughter who'd abandoned her father, was crumbling in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary. After the funeral, we gathered at Rose's house for the reading of the will. Her living room was comfortably worn, with shelves of books and photos of her own children and grandchildren. We sat awkwardly as she brought out a folder of legal documents. "Before I read William's will," Rose began, "he asked me to give you this letter. He wrote it about 6 months ago when he updated his will, but he was very specific that it should only be read after his funeral, with all of you present." She handed me an envelope addressed simply, "For my children." As the oldest, it made sense that I should be the one to read it, but I hesitated, looking at my siblings. "Go ahead," Diane said quietly. "You should read it." I opened the envelope with trembling hands and unfolded the letter. Dad's familiar handwriting blurred as tears filled my eyes. I blinked them away and began to read aloud. "My dear children, if you're reading this, then I've moved on to whatever comes next. Hopefully a place where your mother has been waiting for me. I've had a good life, largely because of the 4 of you. I know there have been misunderstandings and hurt feelings, especially regarding Elena's move to Chicago. What you don't know is that I insisted she go. It was never about her leaving me behind. It was about me wanting at least one of my children to feel completely free to pursue their dreams without guilt. Elena has called me every Sunday for 7 years, never missing once. I asked her not to tell you about our arrangement because I didn't want any of you to feel inadequate or that you weren't doing enough. You all gave me exactly what I needed in your own ways. Diane, your practical help with medical appointments and household matters kept me independent far longer than would have been possible otherwise. Peter, your quiet company on fishing trips and the way you included me in your children's lives gave me purpose. Michael, your determination to make me laugh, even on my darkest days, was a gift I can never repay. And Elena, your weekly calls were the rhythm that structured my weeks, giving me something to look forward to every Sunday. I'm not telling you this to make anyone feel guilty or inadequate. I'm telling you because I want you to understand that love takes different forms, and I felt yours completely from all of you. What would break my heart is to think of my death causing further division among you. Now, about practical matters. Rose has my will, which distributes my assets equally among the 4 of you. But there's something not mentioned in the legal documents that I want Elena to have: the lake house property. Your mother, and I always intended it to go to whichever of you didn't have roots already established. And Elena is the only one without family ties to Indiana. The property taxes are paid up for the next year, giving you time to decide what to do with it. My final wish is simple. Remember how much I love all of you, and try to love each other the same way. Life is too short for misunderstandings to become permanent rifts. All my love, Dad. I lowered the letter, unable to speak further. The lake house had been our family's vacation spot for years, a small cabin on a quiet lake about 2 hours north. We'd stopped going after Mom died. It had been her special place, and without her, it hadn't felt right. I hadn't even realized Dad had kept the property. "The lake house," Peter said, breaking the silence. "I thought he sold it years ago." Rose shook her head. "He kept up the payments. Said someday one of you might want it." Michael looked at me, his expression unreadable. "And he wanted Elena to have it." I shook my head, overwhelmed. "I don't have to take it. We could share it or sell it and split the proceeds." "I don't want." "No," Diane interrupted. "Dad wanted you to have it. That's what should happen." She looked at our brothers. "Right." Slowly they nodded, though I could see the conflict in their eyes. Rose proceeded with the formal reading of the will. As Dad had written, his modest savings and the house in Oakwood were to be divided equally among the four of us. There were small personal bequests as well. Dad's fishing gear to Peter, his collection of first-edition science fiction novels to Michael, Mom's jewelry to Diane, and to me the contents of a safety deposit box at First National Bank. "William asked me to give you the key privately," Rose told me later, pressing a small key into my palm. "He said you'll understand when you open it." As we left Rose's house, my siblings were subdued. The will and Dad's letter had forced them to reconsider their beliefs about me and my relationship with our father. It wasn't a complete reconciliation. Years of misunderstanding couldn't be erased in a single day, but it was a start. "We're having dinner at my house tonight," Diane said as we stood in Rose's driveway. "You and Mark should come." It wasn't the warmest invitation, but it was more than I'd expected. "We'd like that," I said. Before dinner, I went to the bank alone. The safety deposit box contained a manila envelope, and inside were two items, a smaller envelope with my name on it and a USB drive. I opened the envelope first. Inside was a single sheet of paper with Dad's handwriting. "Ellie, these are recordings of our Sunday calls for the past year. I hope they bring you comfort. They were the highlight of my week. I love you, Dad." I stared at the USB drive, tears filling my eyes. Dad had recorded our conversations, our discussions about books and politics, my work stories, his gentle advice when Mark and I had hit a rough patch last winter. His voice, preserved for me to hear again. It was the most precious inheritance I could imagine. Not the lake house, not money, but the evidence of our connection, our love, our weekly ritual that had bridged the physical distance between us. That evening at Diane's house, as we shared memories of Dad over dinner, I felt a shift in the atmosphere. There was still awkwardness, still moments of tension, but there was also a new understanding beginning to take root. "I brought something to show you," I said as we finished the meal. I took out my laptop and the USB drive. Dad recorded some of our Sunday calls. "Would you like to hear one?" There was hesitation, then Peter nodded. "I'd like that." I selected a file from last Christmas when Dad and I had talked about family traditions and shared memories of holidays past. As his voice filled the room, warm, vibrant, so alive, I watched my siblings' faces. Surprise gave way to wistfulness, then something approaching acceptance as they heard the easy rapport between Dad and me, the inside jokes, the genuine connection. "He sounds happy," Michael said when the recording ended, his voice thick with emotion. "Really happy." He was, I confirmed. Not all the time, of course. He missed Mom every day, but he wasn't lonely or abandoned, Michael. He had all of us in different ways. Diane reached across the table and took my hand, the first voluntary contact she'd initiated since I'd arrived. "I'm sorry we tried to keep you from the funeral. That was wrong." "And I'm sorry I stayed away so completely," I said. "I should have pushed harder to be part of family gatherings, holidays. I let the distance become bigger than it needed to be." We weren't magically healed. There were still years of misunderstandings to work through, resentments that wouldn't disappear overnight. But sitting there with my siblings, listening to Dad's voice from beyond, I felt something shift. A door opening that had been closed for too long. Later that night, as Mark and I prepared for bed in the guest room of Diane's house, he asked, What will you do about the lake house? I thought about it, remembering summers there as a child. Dad teaching us to fish, Mom reading on the small porch as the sun set over the water. I think I'd like to keep it. Maybe fix it up a bit. I looked at him. Would you mind spending some vacations in Indiana? He smiled. Not at all. Especially if it means reconnecting with your family. I'd like that, I said softly. I think Dad would too. That night, I dreamed of the lake house. In my dream, Dad was there, sitting on the dock, his fishing line in the water. He looked up as I approached, his smile as warm as summer. You came back, he said. I never really left, I told him. He nodded, understanding completely as he always had. That's what family means, Ellie. Present or absent, close or far, we never really leave each other. I woke with tears on my cheeks, but a sense of peace in my heart. The road ahead with my siblings wouldn't be easy, but Dad had given us a map. Now it was up to us to find our way back to each other. 2 months after the funeral, I stood on the weathered dock of the lake house, watching the sunrise paint the water gold. Spring had arrived early, bringing with it a sense of renewal that seemed fitting. Mark was still asleep inside the cabin, but I'd woken with the first light, drawn to the peaceful stillness of morning on the lake. We'd driven up from Chicago the previous evening, our car loaded with cleaning supplies, tools, and enough food for the long weekend. This was our first visit to the lake house since Dad's death, the first step in deciding what to do with this unexpected inheritance. The cabin needed work. Years of minimal maintenance had left it shabby but sound. The porch sagged slightly, the windows needed recaulking, and the interior hadn't been updated since the early 1990s when Mom had last redecorated. But standing there on the dock, watching an osprey dive into the lake and emerge with a fish, I felt a connection to this place that transcended its physical condition. This was where Dad had taught me to swim, where Mom had sketched wildflowers in her journal, where my siblings and I had spent countless summer days building memories. In the soft morning light, I could almost see ghostly imprints of those moments. Peter and Michael racing down this very dock, Diane sunbathing with her Walkman while pretending to study for college exams, Dad grilling fish we caught ourselves. My phone vibrated in my pocket, interrupting my reverie. It was a text from Diane. Made it to Peter's last night. Weather looks good for the drive up today. Need us to bring anything. I smiled, still slightly surprised by this development. After that tense dinner at Diane's house following the funeral, we'd begun a cautious reconnection. It had been my idea to invite my siblings to the lake house this weekend, partly to discuss what to do with the property, but mostly to see if we could recapture some of what we'd lost. Just yourselves, I texted back. We brought plenty of everything. I hadn't expected all of them to accept. Peter had been the first to say yes, bringing his wife Karen and their teenage kids. Then Diane had surprised me by asking if she could come too. Michael had been the last holdout, initially declining with a vague excuse about work. But 3 days ago he'd called, not texted, to ask if the invitation was still open. Mark's making his famous chili for dinner, I'd told him, trying to keep my voice casual while my heart raced with hope. More than enough for everyone. There had been a pause, then. I make better chili than your husband, and we both know it, he'd said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. I'll bring the ingredients. Tell Mark I'm taking over his kitchen. It was such a Michael thing to say, competitive and affectionate at once, that I'd found myself blinking back tears after hanging up. That brief exchange felt more like my brother than anything in the past 8 years. The sound of the screen door creaking open pulled me back to the present. Mark walked down to the dock, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. Thought I'd find you out here, he said, handing me one. How long have you been up? Since first light, I admitted, accepting the mug gratefully. Just thinking. He nodded, understanding without needing more explanation. Nervous about everyone coming. Terrified, I admitted with a small laugh. What if it's a disaster? What if we just end up arguing about old hurts or the inheritance or what if it's exactly what all of you need? Mark interrupted gently. Your dad knew what he was doing, Elena. Trust him a little. I sipped my coffee, letting the warmth spread through me. You think he planned this? Leaving me the lake house, knowing it would force us all to talk. Mark shrugged. From everything you've told me about him, and what I saw myself, he was a pretty wise man. And he knew his children. I thought about the recordings of our calls, the notebook Dad had kept, his letter read at the will reading. Maybe Mark was right. Maybe this was Dad's final gift, not just the property itself, but the opportunity it created. We spent the morning cleaning the cabin, wiping away years of dust and disuse. Around noon, Peter's minivan pulled into the gravel driveway, followed closely by Diane's SUV. I stepped onto the porch, wiping my hands nervously on my jeans as they emerged from their vehicles. Peter's kids, Zach, 16, and Emma, 14, tumbled out first, immediately racing toward the lake with the boundless energy of teenagers. Don't go in the water yet. Karen called after them, shaking her head fondly. Your dad hasn't checked the dock. Peter approached with a tentative smile, carrying a cooler. Place looks the same, he said, glancing around. Smaller than I remember, though. Everything's smaller when you grow up, I replied, returning his smile. Diane hung back slightly, her designer sunglasses hiding her eyes. She'd always been the most image-conscious of us, and even for a weekend at a rustic cabin, she was impeccably dressed in what appeared to be brand-new casual clothes. I brought wine, she said, holding up a canvas bag that clinked with bottles. And I remembered that you liked those cheese crackers with the peanut butter, so I got some of those too. The fact that she remembered my favorite childhood snack, something I hadn't eaten in years, touched me deeply. Thanks, Dee, I said, using her childhood nickname without thinking. A flicker of surprise crossed her face, followed by a genuine smile that made her look suddenly younger. Thought we might need comfort food if we're going to be sorting through Dad's stuff. I hadn't told them yet that there was very little of Dad's here. The cabin had been closed up for years, with just a few fishing rods in the closet and some ancient board games in the cabinet under the TV. Whatever we were going to face this weekend, it wouldn't be the emotional landmine of sorting through personal possessions. We were showing Peter and Diane to their rooms when the rumble of a motorcycle announced Michael's arrival. Always the family rebel, he'd traded in his sensible car for a Harley after his divorce 3 years ago. Another life event I'd missed. Hope you weren't serious about cooking, Mark called as Michael removed his helmet. I've already started the chili. Michael grinned, slinging a backpack over his shoulder. We'll have a cook-off. Let the family decide whose is better. I'm staying out of that one, Peter muttered, but he was smiling too. For a moment, as the 5 of us stood in the yard of the lake house, it felt almost normal, as if the years of estrangement had been just a brief interruption rather than nearly a decade of separate lives. The afternoon passed in a blur of activity. Peter and Mark inspected the dock and declared it sound enough for swimming. Zach and Emma immediately jumped in, despite the water still being chilly in early spring. Michael and I tackled the boathouse, discovering that the old rowboat inside was surprisingly intact despite years of neglect. Remember when Dad tried to teach us all to fish from this thing? Michael asked, running his hand along the weathered gunnel. And you fell in trying to net that tiny bluegill. I laughed. Mom was so mad because I was wearing my new shoes. Dad wasn't mad, though, Michael said thoughtfully. He just hauled you back in and said, At least now we know those life jackets work. We finished together, and our laughter echoed across the water. Dinner that evening was a crowded, noisy affair around the kitchen table. Mark and Michael had indeed staged a chili cook-off, resulting in 2 massive pots that would feed us for days. The conversation flowed more easily than I'd dared to hope, fueled by Diane's wine and the shared experience of being back in this place that held so many memories. So what are you thinking of doing with this place? Peter asked eventually, as we lingered over dessert, esmoires made in the fireplace, another family tradition resurrected. I glanced at Mark, who nodded encouragingly. Actually, I wanted to talk to all of you about that, I said. Legally, Dad left it to me. But this place belongs to all of us in a way that goes beyond paper. Diane set down her wine glass. What are you suggesting? I'd like to keep it, I said. Fix it up, make it usable again. But as a shared place for all of us, we could work out a schedule for who uses it when. Split the taxes and maintenance costs. Make it a family place again, the way it was meant to be. There was a moment of silence as my siblings exchanged glances. You'd do that? Michael asked, even after we. He trailed off, but I knew what he meant. Even after they'd tried to exclude me from Dad's funeral, after years of thinking the worst of me. Especially after that, I said quietly. Dad wanted this place to bring us back together. I think he knew exactly what he was doing when he left it to me specifically. What do you mean? Peter asked. I took a deep breath. If he'd left it to all of us equally, we probably would have just sold it and split the money. It would have been the practical thing to do, with all of you established here and me in Chicago. But by leaving it to me, the one who moved away, he made sure I'd have to come back, and that we'd have to talk about it. Devious old man, Michael said, but there was affection in his voice. Diane leaned forward. I'm in. I could use a place to escape from the city sometimes. Her consulting business kept her traveling constantly, and I knew she rarely took time off. We'd love for the kids to have a summer place, Karen said, looking at Peter, who nodded. Michael, I asked, turning to our youngest sibling. He pretended to consider, though I could already see the answer in his eyes. Well, someone has to make sure you city folks don't ruin the place with some fancy renovation. Relief washed over me. Then it settled. The Patterson family lake house lives on. Later that night, after everyone else had gone to bed, I found myself back on the dock, watching moonlight shimmer on the water. The sound of footsteps made me turn to see Diane approaching, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders against the spring chill. Couldn't sleep, she said, sitting beside me. Too many memories. I nodded. Good ones, I hope. Mostly. She was quiet for a moment, then asked, Do you remember Mom's rules for the lake? No swimming alone. No boats without life jackets. No running on the dock. No diving in the shallow end, I continued. She was so safety conscious. Meanwhile, Dad would be teaching us how to do cannonballs off the end here, Diane said with a soft laugh. They balanced each other that way. We sat in companionable silence for a while before she spoke again. I'm sorry, Elena, for the text about the funeral, for all the years of thinking you didn't care. I should have known better. You couldn't have known about the calls, I said. Dad was pretty adamant about keeping them between us. She shook her head. It's not just that. Even before that, I should have tried harder to understand why you left. I was so angry we all were. Mom was gone, and then you were gone too. It felt like the family was falling apart. I never meant to stay away completely, I admitted. At first, it was just the job getting established. Then it got harder to come back, knowing what you all thought of me. It was easier to just focus on my calls with Dad. And we made it worse by being cold when you did visit, Diane acknowledged. I think we were punishing you for leaving. The honesty between us felt fragile but precious, like thin ice that might bear our weight if we stepped carefully. I missed you, I said simply. All of you. She reached over and took my hand. We missed you too, even when we were angriest. We sat together on the dock until the chill became too much, then made our way back to the cabin. Before heading to our respective rooms, Diane paused. Do you think Dad knew this would happen? She asked. That leaving you the lake house would force us to deal with everything? I smiled, thinking of the recordings, the notebook, the carefully worded letter. I think Dad played the long game. He always did. The next morning, As sunlight streamed through the dusty windows of the cabin, I found Michael in the kitchen, already making coffee. He handed me a mug without asking if I wanted one. Some sibling knowledge transcended time and distance. "I've been thinking about the renovation," he said without preamble. "The roof should be the first priority, then the porch." I sipped my coffee, hiding my smile. "I thought you were worried about us making it too fancy." He rolled his eyes. "There's a difference between fancy and not having a ceiling cave in when it rains. I'm a contractor, remember? I know what I'm talking about." It was a peace offering, his expertise, his time. "So you'd help with the work?" I asked. "Someone has to," he replied gruffly. "Besides, I've got some vacation time saved up." "I could take a week this summer," I offered. "Mark, too. We could make a project of it." Michael nodded, his expression softening. "Like when we used to help Dad with projects around the house." I remembered those days, Dad's patient instructions, the satisfaction of creating something with our hands. He was a good teacher. "The best," Michael agreed. He hesitated, then added, "I listened to some of those recordings. The ones you shared from the USB drive." I tensed slightly. I'd made copies for each of my siblings after the funeral, but hadn't asked if they'd listened. And "He sounds like he really knew you," Michael said. "The real you, not just the sister who left. He talked about your work, your friends, your life in Chicago like he was right there with you." "He was," I said softly, "in all the ways that mattered." Michael set his coffee down. "I feel like I've missed out on knowing that person, the Elena he knew. My big sister with the life in Chicago, who apparently has a weird collection of vintage salt and pepper shakers and volunteers at an animal shelter on Saturdays." I laughed, surprised he'd remembered those details from the recordings. "The collection isn't that weird. 27 sets of salt and pepper shakers shaped like different vegetables is definitely weird," he countered, but he was smiling. "My point is, I'd like to know that person. If she's willing to get to know the Michael who exists now, not the angry kid brother she left behind." The simple honesty of his words caught me off guard. Of all my siblings, Michael had been the most openly hostile about my departure, the most resistant to my attempts to maintain connections on my brief visits home. Now he was offering the most direct olive branch. "I'd like that," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Very much." He nodded once, then picked up his coffee again, the moment of vulnerability passing but not forgotten. "Good. Now, about this porch. We're going to need to replace at least 4 support posts and probably half the decking." By mid-morning, the cabin was alive with activity. Peter and his kids were down at the lake, attempting to clean years of muck from the small beach area. Diane had taken charge of the interior, creating inventory lists of what needed to be replaced or repaired. Michael and Mark were on the roof, inspecting the shingles and arguing good-naturedly about the best approach to repairs. I moved between groups, bringing drinks, taking notes, feeling a growing sense of wonder at how quickly we'd fallen into collaborative work. There were still awkward moments, brief silences when someone referenced a family event I'd missed or when I mentioned something from my Chicago life that felt foreign to them. But these moments passed more easily each time. Around noon, I was sorting through the ancient board games in the living room when I found something unexpected tucked between Monopoly and Scrabble, a leather-bound photo album I didn't recognize. I opened it curiously and gasped. Inside were photos of the lake house through the years, but not the familiar family photos we'd always kept in albums at the main house. These were newer, showing the cabin in different seasons, sometimes empty, sometimes with Dad sitting alone on the porch or fishing from the dock. The dates on the backs of the photos ranged from after Mom's death right up until about a year ago. Dad had been coming here alone all this time. But what truly caught my breath were the other photos interspersed throughout. Pictures of me in Chicago that I'd sent Dad over the years. Me standing in front of my first apartment building. Me and Mark on our wedding day. Me receiving an award at work. All carefully arranged alongside the lake house photos, as if creating a parallel timeline of our separate lives. On the last page was a note in Dad's handwriting. For Elena, 2 halves of my heart. May they be reunited someday. What's that? Peter asked, coming in from outside, his clothes smudged with dirt from the beach cleanup. Wordlessly, I handed him the album. He sat beside me on the couch, turning the pages slowly. I had no idea he kept coming up here, he said finally. Neither did I admitted. He never mentioned it in our calls. Peter pointed to a photo of the cabin in autumn, leaves blazing red and gold around it. This was taken the weekend he told us he was going to a teaching conference. 3 years ago, I think. One by one, the others drifted in, drawn by our quiet conversation. Soon we were all crowded on and around the couch, looking through the album together, each recognizing moments when Dad had created alibis to come to the lake alone. Why would he keep it secret? Diane wondered. He knew we all loved this place. Maybe it was his way of keeping Mom close, Karen suggested gently. This was her favorite place. Or maybe, Mark said, it was his way of keeping Elena close too. When he was here, he was connecting with both the past and the future, the family memories and the daughter who'd moved on. The thought brought tears to my eyes. Dad had created this bridge between worlds long before he'd left us the means to cross it ourselves. That evening, as the sun set over the lake, we built a bonfire on the beach. The kids roasted marshmallows while the adults sat in camp chairs, passing a bottle of whiskey that Peter had discovered in the back of a kitchen cabinet. Dad's emergency supply, he declared it, and we'd all agreed that this occasion warranted its use. I think we should each take a week during the summer, Diane was saying, organizing as always. Then maybe split holiday weekends, rotate Thanksgiving and Christmas. And we all come together for the 4th of July, I suggested. Make it a family tradition, everyone here together. There were nods of agreement around the fire. The plans we were making felt both pragmatic and profound, a scaffolding for rebuilding relationships that had nearly collapsed under the weight of misunderstanding. To Dad, Michael said suddenly, raising the whiskey bottle, who knew exactly what he was doing. To Dad, we echoed, and in the crackling of the fire, I could almost hear his quiet chuckle of satisfaction. Later that night, I called Rose Henderson. I'd been checking in with her regularly since the funeral, grateful for her role in preserving Dad's true story. We're at the lake house, I told her. All of us. William would be so pleased, she said warmly. That's exactly what he hoped for. Did you know he'd been coming up here on his own? I asked. Oh, yes, she replied. He'd asked me to collect his mail when he went. Said it was his thinking place where he could feel close to both your mother and you. I looked out the window at my siblings, still sitting around the fire, their faces golden in its light. I wish he could see us now. Oh, honey, Rose said softly. I think he can. After we hung up, I joined the others by the fire. The night was growing cooler, and we huddled closer to the flames. Remember when Dad used to tell ghost stories out here? Peter asked, and soon we were all trying to recreate Dad's most famous campfire tales, laughing at our imperfect memories and filling in the gaps for each other. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, old patterns that emerged and had to be consciously set aside. Diane still occasionally slipped into condescension when talking about my city life. Michael sometimes retreated into silence when conversations touched on the years we'd been apart. Peter, ever the peacemaker, sometimes tried too hard to smooth over rough edges that needed to be acknowledged. And I still felt the impulse to defend my choices, to prove my connection to Dad had been real and meaningful, even from a distance. But sitting there in the firelight, I could see the outline of what we might become. Not the same family we had been before Mom died and I left, but something new. Something that honored the past while creating space for who we all were now. The next morning, as we packed up to leave, Peter helped me close up the boathouse. So you'll email us all the information about the property taxes? He asked. And I'll get you estimates for the roof repair from some contacts I have in this area. And I'll set up a shared calendar for scheduling. Diane had already volunteered. Michael had promised to return in 2 weeks with proper tools to start work on the porch. Before it collapses completely, he'd added with brotherly exaggeration. As we stood in the driveway saying our goodbyes, I felt a strange mix of emotions, sadness at parting, satisfaction at what we'd begun, and a quiet joy that felt like Dad's final gift to us. "We should take a picture," Karen suggested suddenly. "All of you together, in front of the cabin." We assembled on the front steps, Peter, Diane, Michael, and me, with the weathered cabin behind us. As Karen counted down, Michael threw his arm around my shoulders. "Dad would have loved this weekend," he said quietly. "He orchestrated it," I replied, leaning into his embrace, right down to the whiskey bottle in the cabinet. The camera flashed, capturing the 4 of us on the steps of the lake house our father had left behind, not just as property to be inherited, but as the foundation for rebuilding what we'd nearly lost. 3 months later, on the 4th of July, we gathered again at the lake house. The roof had been repaired, the porch rebuilt, the interior freshly painted. Michael had brought his new girlfriend, Peter's kids had invited friends, and Diane had actually taken a full week off work to be there. Mark and I had driven up a day early to open the place and prepare. As I stood in the kitchen that morning, making coffee and listening to him humming as he set up lawn chairs on the new porch, I felt my phone vibrate with a text. It was from Diane, just past the lakeside diner. "Remember how Dad always had to stop there for pie on our way up? I got one for tonight. Blueberry." I smiled, typing back, "Perfect. Safe driving. See you soon." Later, when everyone had arrived and the cabin was full of noise and life, I slipped away to the dock for a moment of quiet. The late afternoon sun warmed my face as I closed my eyes, feeling the gentle rocking of the dock beneath me. "Found you," Mark said, coming to sit beside me. "Your siblings are arguing about who gets to light the grill. Some things never change." I laughed. "Let me guess, Michael's insisting charcoal temperature is an art form that none of us understand." "Something like that," he confirmed with a grin. "You okay out here?" I nodded, leaning against his shoulder, just thinking about Dad, how he managed to give us exactly what we needed, even after he was gone. The lake house. Not just the property, I said. The reason to come together again. The excuse to talk, to remember why we mattered to each other. I looked back at the cabin, where my family's voices carried through the open windows. He knew we'd never sell it if it meant we might start healing. Mark kissed the top of my head. "Smart man, your dad." "Yes," I agreed. "He always was." Later that evening, as fireworks exploded over the lake and we all sat together on the new porch, I thought about the text message that had started it all. Dad passed away. Don't bother coming to the funeral. You lost that right when you abandoned him. How differently things might have gone if I'd listened, if I'd let my siblings' anger keep me away. If Dad hadn't made sure there was evidence of our connection, the recordings, the notebook, the witnesses to our Sunday calls. Diane caught me watching her and raised her glass in a silent toast. I raised mine in return, recognizing the journey we'd made from that angry text message to this moment of connection. Dad had been right all along. Love does take different forms. Sometimes it's Sunday phone calls that span years and miles. Sometimes it's fishing trips and practical help with daily needs. Sometimes it's making someone laugh on their darkest days. And sometimes it's leaving behind not just what you owned, but the map to find what was lost. As the finale of fireworks painted the night sky in brilliant colors, reflected in the still waters of the lake, I felt Dad's presence as strongly as if he were sitting beside us on the porch. Not gone, just transformed, like our family itself. Broken, repaired, and made stronger at the places where we'd nearly shattered.